question really. I suppose if you're going to be collating all this information, it would be really useful if it could be done in a sort of spatial way, so that actually and then is available to the wider, I don't know, group, anyone who's, do you know what I mean? Because it's a really good way of understanding who's working where. And, Mark was just saying about that continued sort of integration, collaboration. So I don't know if that's a possibility. Are you able to do that, to sort of bring that in a sort of spatial way so people can actually see what's happening where?
My hope is that we would be able to, depending on whether we get any funding to be able to do that. At the moment, it's pulling together the list with probably the a general location of where the projects are. To actually put that on a mapping tool might need some funding from somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But, I wouldn't have any objections to anybody sharing that. If everybody's contributing to it, everybody should see the final outcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Morag. So moving on, agenda item 4 is an update from Agritas, and that's Tom. Welcome, Tom.
Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Thank you for having me. It's good to see quite a few familiar faces on the call. I'll do a quick introduction for those that don't know me. So my name's Tom Sharifi, and I am currently the Global Environmental and Sustainability Manager for Agritas, having been with the company now for about 15 months, sort of from the beginning of the project. And my role is partly to liaise with you guys and try and work through some of the issues that some of the local nature partnerships, stakeholder groups, the Environment Agency, Wessex Water, all of you together to try and obviously work in partnership to make sure that we're good neighbours, good citizens, all of the good stuff there. So thank you for inviting me along today. I do have a bit of an update for you. I'm going to preface it though, Sian, with a bit of what I'm about to show you has not been publicly shared yet, and so therefore I'm going to ask for discretion. In other words, please don't share it with anybody else. I know you're recording this. I'm not sure who this gets distributed to outside of here, so if it's okay, just if we can keep it in these sort of four walls, as it were. Right, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen and just bring you up an update on the site itself. So we literally had a town hall yesterday, and if you can let me know if that comes up okay. Hang on a minute, it might take a little while to load because this site seems to be particularly slow at the moment. Okay, let's close that.
Yeah, we can see that too.
You can see that okay? Brilliant. I'll just try and get you guys off the screen. Oh, that's gonna preface it. Let's get rid of that. Right. Okay. So things are going well. First of all, I think we should probably let you know. So we've been doing the piling and the piling caps for since probably last April, May time. We're up to about 14,500, 15,000 pile caps out of the 18,000 required for building one. So everything's been going really well there. But what I wanted to sort of bring you on to, and I hope this is going to change the screen in a second, because I say it's been really slow at the moment. No, it's not going to do it, is it? Come on. Come on. So this is supposed to show a graphic of the pre and post pile caps, but that picture shows you as it is kind of now. Right, I might just have to, here we go. Right. So we've been on a bit of a embargo about telling people things since sort of around about December, because there's been a bit of a rethink to the project. And when I say rethink, I don't mean in any way bad for the site or the project itself. As you're probably all aware, manufacturing in the UK is really expensive. Inflation has been particularly painful, I think, for the Tata Group when looking at this project overall. So the good news is we have redesigned the plant effectively, and we are reducing the footprint of the size of the plant without losing any of the jobs, the efficiency, or the output that we have originally planned to produce for the building. So as you can sort of see here, and again, I'm not going to go into sort of major process detail with you guys. What I really wanted to alert you to, because it's really important for this group, we are going to be changing from steam generated boilers that were going to be used for the ovens, effectively for the dry coating process, or again, something to do with the battery process I'm not amazingly au fait with. We will now no longer be using steam. We will be using electric ovens to do this. The impact on the amount of water that we will be using is substantial, hugely significant. We are effectively taking out a process that uses water, obviously, and we'll use that with electricity instead. I haven't got the figures for you yet, but I would like to think that we are going to be so much lower than, again, either the EA's permissible limits under the permit, or indeed what, again, maybe you guys originally thought we might be doing to the area. So this is fantastic news. Basically, we're absolutely becoming a more efficient plant because of the back of this. And as you can see from what I'm showing you here, we're reducing the size, which is always a good visual impact, of course, noise impact, etc. The overall footprint size reduces as well. And as I said about sort of keeping things stum, that's, we've managed to reduce a lot of money out of the project as well, which is always good for sustainability, etc. for the actual business model. So that's kind of the update from the business itself. I'm just going to stop sharing that now because I think that's the most applicable. Steve Muse, obviously you had a load of questions for me that, again, I couldn't really answer until now regarding some of the water process and stuff. I will happily take questions now because I see, Mark, you've got your hand up, and then maybe I'll come on to some of those other aspects in a second. So Mark, please.
Yeah, hi Tom, thanks for the update. Just a bit of background in case you don't know, I'm sort of involved in the Environment Agency steering group for the Agritas project, looking at environmental impacts amongst other things. Yeah. The water availability study, I've had a few discussions with the EA about it, so I know that Arup are doing some work. I just wondered if you could give me an update on the status of that work, and has the scope been agreed? Does it consider HRA considerations, for example?
So, Mark, that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it. Basically, the last I heard, so we have the capital projects team who are really designing, building the facility, etc. A guy called Joe Hibbert and team have been dealing with you guys with regards to this water study, but I don't know who's paid for it, who's paying for it, who's commissioned it, who's receiving it, and by when. So I've not been really kept in the loop on this, but I would like to get involved if I can. So if you know who you've been dealing with or know anything more, then I can maybe go and source that information for you.
Okay, well, I can probably, I'm not dealing with Arup directly. That's being done through the Environment Agency, but I have got a catch-up call with the agency later on today, so maybe I can sort of pass your message on and we can link things up.
That'd be great. As to say, it's not that the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand here, but the capital projects team are so focused constantly on getting this building built that kind of everything else is noise to them. So when I hear things like, an EA study has been commissioned on the water availability, and then I don't get included, it's a bit frustrating, but then I can go and dig for that. So if you can help us with that, Mark, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah.
And as I say, by what I'm showing you, I think things are going to be a lot more positive with regards to water going forward as well anyway. So that was sort of the big news to give you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Okay. Right. So, yes. Anyone else? Yep.
I can't see any more questions. Oh, Steve.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Yeah.
Hi. How you doing?
Good.
I'm sure you're desperate to get all this news out of the door. So great relief for you. And that looks really encouraging on the face of it, which is really great. So the thrust of my question was all around the water, really, wasn't it? And about how how much did it reuse and the quantity. So really, once you've got more definitive figures, if you're able to pass us over, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure thing. Definitely. I mean, I say so at the moment, Steve. The process is being redesigned, not completely, as I say, because you're still got the same technologies, etc. However, what they found is the machines they were going to go and get from China have now been superseded basically by these Italian machines. I think they're European or whatever. It's all to do with the folding and the stacking of the foil that coats the cathode and the anode, and effectively those machines are about 30% smaller than the Chinese machine. So that's what's allowing us to really reduce the overall footprint by that. That means obviously less energy, less water, etc. for whatever those then machines said need, the requirements itself, but they do the job quicker, they're more efficient. As with all technology improvements, things should get better. So we're really excited about this because this is going to allow us to have the same output whilst also reducing the size of the building itself, which is great news. Yes, again, Steve.
I had one more question. Sorry, Tom. Just came
Please.
Up. Are the schedules for the other two buildings still the same? And I presume they'll be the same size as building one?
Good question. Right. So yes. So again, this is completely between us. There is a slight delay to building one due to now this redevelopment. We're now looking at about a 7-month delay before start of production. So I believe October 26 was the first planned production date. That will now be 2027 at some point. So I'd say probably about sort of September, October, about June time, 2027. Again, please don't quote me on this. I say I'm only privy to what I hear as well, but I do know exactly. So allowing for a bit of time now. That doesn't. But what that doesn't stop is the build. So the steel works, the building itself will continue to go up at the pace that it was always going to go up, and that should be ready. Again within the same time frame that was set. What will take a bit longer because of the lead times of these new machines is to get them in and then get them in actually working, commissioned, etc., etc. So that's why there's a bit of a delay there, but no longer than that. As for building 2 and 3, as you said, Steve, the plan will be to then mirror the building 1 for those 2 as well.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Hey, any other questions? I'm sure I say there's so much I could tell you about and stuff, but I'll try and get some definitive water figures for the next meeting for you guys. I say once I can get hold of those and see some actual process equipment. But what I want to really share with you today was it is huge news that we've changed technologies, that we're going to use so much less water off the back of that. So, and also probably to add as well, we've got, as you know, we're part of the Tata Group. The Tata Group has this thing, and I think I mentioned this to you, Steve, definitely before, called Project Alingana, which is like AALINGA, whatever. You can look it up online. 2 of the core key sustainability pillars of that project are around water and biodiversity. So for the site, we will have and will continue to work on targets for reducing water usage and increasing biodiversity net gain as well. So I see myself really being part of this group going forward, because we're going to need you to help us maybe come up with some solutions, some ideas, whatever, on those 2 kind of key topics. So please do keep me included in these if you can and stuff, because as we do develop, we're going to need some absolute expertise from you guys. So sort of keep that in the back of your mind if you can, that we absolutely are being targeted by the Tata Group to increase biodiversity net gain and to come up with a strategy to reduce water and recycle, etc. Mark.
Yeah, really interesting your mention there of biodiversity net gain, because I have been involved in producing some of the Natural England responses to the LDO going back about 6 months, and when I was involved in that, it was clarified to me that the development is not subject to BNG officially. So it's good news that the company's interested in BNG. I mean, can you say any more about that in terms of like so if you're not if you actually don't have to meet BNG, what is your ambition then?
So in terms of increasing species diversity or actual numbers, we haven't looked at anything like that yet, Mark. All we know is that the chairman of the Tata Group has set out that there are 4 main pillars of sustainability that he wants the whole Tata Group globally to look at. So you've got climate change, carbon, absolutely. Circularity, supply chain, that's number 2. Number 3, and I just love this, is biodiversity. So it's got its own literal pillar, etc., and the final one being water. So to share, I mean, if you'd like more, I mean, if you just literally type in Project Alingana into Google, it will come up with loads of stuff there for you to give you sort of a bit of a deep dive into what their thinking behind that is. But all I can say is that we're really happy that we've got that as a kind of an arm that we can use as a sustainability environmental department, because often our voice is left to a little bit unheard sometimes. So this being at the forefront of what the business, the whole group wants to achieve, is actually massively empowering for me. So that's what I can sort of give you on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's thinking about the way forward of that. Obviously you've got the BNG framework that there is official requirement for many developments. I mean, the company could sort of say, well, in the spirit of what we want to do, we could actually just conform to that BNG requirement. That would be quite an interesting way forward.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. If you can, I mean, again, I can just look that up, I guess, or if you can send us something on that, that might give me a bit of a, something to go back to the business with and say, look, we've got some actual hard facts or data here on how we can do this. So can we get on with it, please, or at least bake it into sort of next year's plan or the year after, whatever? Because as you know, we've got a lot of land, a lot of available land potentially to use. So let's try and utilize that as much as we can.
And just a bit of background on that, when I was dealing with Stantec, in the last 3 months, when I raised the issue of BNG, I was told quite clearly that no, this is not subject to BNG. So this is good news.
Yeah.
But just to let you know that that's the sort of some of the background conversations that have gone on.
Absolutely. And as you're right, Mark, Stantec and the crew, will try and do what they're told, obviously, and and I think they say anything to do with biodiversity, etc., is not, what's the word, key to getting that building built. But for our group and for us, it is. So I'm really pleased to hear that I'm getting the backing I need on this one as well. Yeah,
Okay,
really good news.
brilliant. Thanks, Tom.
No problem.
Thanks, Mark. Georgia, you have a question.
Hi, Georgia.
Hello, good to see you, Tom.
See you too.
Sorry, this is probably outside of this meeting, but I'd really like to pick up on the BNG issue as well, and local wildlife sites, Tom, as I'm sure you would expect, especially
Yes.
if the footprint is being reduced, can that mitigate or avoid some of the impact that's going to happen on the local wildlife sites? But I have just put in the chat an extract from the development consent order for Gravity, which does say that BNG is required. So I'm interested that Mark's been told it definitely isn't required. So I'm sure that's probably for a discussion outside of this meeting, which is the Peatland Partnership. But yeah, it'd be interesting to just pick that up somewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you for posting that, Georgia. Actually, that's great. That helps me as well, to be honest with you. Yeah, because it's one of these, not hot potatoes. It's just nobody really wants to do it except us lot, which is annoying because, again, we're not planners, designers, architects, or whatever, but we are ecologists. So it's, we'll try and get on that.
Great. Thanks. Mark, I don't know if it's useful for us to have a chat, but I'm really interested in picking up on that.
That would be good. Yeah, happy to have a chat, Georgia.
Okay, I'll drop you an email.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Great. Any further questions for Tom? No. Great. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Good to
You're
see
very
you.
welcome. Yeah,
I'm
you
sure
too.
we'll see you again.
You will. If it's okay, I'm going to drop off. I'm sort of in mid-audit at the moment for my environmental 14001 ISO standard, so I'm going to jump back into that if that's okay with you guys. Yeah.
Understandable. Thanks for making the time today.
Brilliant. You're absolutely welcome. Pleasure as always. Have a great afternoon, everybody. See you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Moving on, agenda item 5, Peatscapes, Carbon Futures in the Mire. That's Nye. I think Nye, you're on my other screen. I'm sure I know you're there.
I am. you're gonna have to have faith. If it's okay, I'll share my screen. I do have some slides.
Great.
Can everybody see that? Is that up and running?
Yes, we can see that fine now. Thank you.
Amazing, perfect. So, hi everyone. I feel like everybody knows me. I introduced myself at the start of these things anyway. My name is Anara Maragolvara. I go by Nye, and I work at the University of Bristol on the Peatscapes project. Sorry, I'm just going to start a timer before I start. Amazing. So we're interested in essentially knowledge controversies around peatland restoration. That basically means that we want to understand where disagreements about peatland restoration come from, and if this is changing as restoration changes. So to accomplish this, obviously, we need to be sensitive to the distinctive physical characteristics of peatland sites, but we need to understand peatlands as culturally and economically dynamic, right? They've got contested meanings, contested histories. Most importantly, it's really key that we don't arrive with any preconceived notions of what peatlands are for, as often this is going to be precisely the question which is at issue. Essentially, we're trying to understand peatland restoration as a social process. We want to understand how far restoration efforts get impacted by local histories of the sites that they try to restore. We want to understand how science gets mobilized in the debates around peatland restoration. And finally, we're also looking at recent attempts to render peatland restoration independently economically viable through things like carbon credits, but also BNG. So, as Nickelback once sang, how are you going to do it? We focus in particular on interviews, which we look at in combination with technical literature, by which we mean government reports, white papers, newspaper articles. Interviews are a really good way of getting into a topic and understanding the underlying issues, right? We're interested in how people think about these landscapes in ways that they might not necessarily fully reflect on themselves. And so interviews are really useful for drawing out the sort of subsurface mechanisms for how people are engaging with peatlands. Interviews are split into two categories, walking interviews and desk-based interviews. Walking interviews are going to be most appropriate for people who do a lot of work on the sites, people like restoration practitioners, volunteers, farmers, members of local communities. Desk-based interviews, on the other hand, they're going to be more appropriate with professionals who, they might not necessarily always be on site, their work is still key to their management. So this is like peatland ecologists, site managers, project funders, peat extractors. As keen as we are not to shut people out for not using the recognized lexicon of environmental science, we do recognize that because we're social scientists ourselves, we've obviously got to develop a firm grasp of the scientific processes, the practices of measurement which do compose peatland science. So geographers, people like George Cusworth and Mark Cooper, have recently called for social science as a whole to pay some more attention to the particulars of ecological measurement and analysis, right? So as part of our research, we're engaging with the ecological academic literature, project reports, alongside going out into the field to get some more hands-on experience with restoration practitioners and ecologists, taking things like dip well readings, carbon flux measurements, species recording. Finally, we are also looking at doing some work with photo voice for the project. So photo voice is a comparatively new method in the environmental social sciences. Basically, what it involves is asking participants to take photographs of an ongoing environmental process, peatland restoration, as well as to provide a written narrative that provides a sort of explanation of like the meaning of that process. It's got a number of potential advantages over just straightforward interviewing. Firstly, it gives a little bit more agency to participants. There's like with interviews, there's sometimes a bit of a danger that there's an expected or even like a correct answer. Also, they're less time constrained and a bit more open-ended form of expression than like an on-the-spot verbal answer at an interview. But we haven't done any photo voice yet, so don't quote me yet. In terms of sites, we've got 4, 2 in the UK and 2 in Estonia. So our British sites are Honeygar in the Great Fen, Honeygar on the Levels, of course, and the Great Fen in East Anglia. And then in Estonia, we're looking at the Lavassaare peatlands and the Kolgajani peatlands. So the Lavassaare peatlands are historically like the largest and probably the most important peat mining area in Estonia. And they're also the subject of a huge restoration project as part of the Horizon 2020 Waterland scheme. And then the Kolgajani peatlands are interesting, basically because state-funded restoration efforts are kind of in conflict, both with forestry, but also with certain ideas about biodiversity. My areas of focus are the 2 British sites, and I'm basically going to talk about Honeygar now. So as a lot of people will already know, Honeygar is a 200-acre ex-dairy farm, which was bought by the Somerset Wildlife Trust in 2021. Honeygar and the Adapting the Levels project, of which it's a keystone, is a really interesting case study for a number of reasons. Firstly, the agricultural context. So Somerset Levels and Moors are characterized by largely extensive dairy farming and beef. And it's also got one of the smallest average farm sizes in the country. Average farm size in the region of 69 hectares. I think someone's going to correct me on that. I know. This means that Honeygar and the wider Somerset Levels and Moors offer a really useful contrast with my other site in the Fens, which has an average farm size of around 123 hectares. Another reason that Honeygar is really cool for our project is basically because of how much knowledge is being produced on Honeygar. As we may have heard, it's being developed as a sort of case study in the restoration of the Avalon marshes, and so the site is intensely observed. The site's got 37 dip wells used to monitor water table depth. This is the screw cap of one dip well with a toad that actually lived in the little recess of the top of the dip well. Local volunteers run weekly insect trapping and identification sessions, and audio recorders produce data which is fed into machine learning driven bird call identification programs. Finally, obviously, the carbon flux is monitored on Honeygar, measuring the amount of carbon dioxide being released and even sequestered by the peat. So in terms of our arguments, we've basically grouped our work into 3 main packages. The first one is investigating how peat restoration interacts with local communities and the historical and contemporary ways of living with and knowing peatlands. Basically, we found that heritage is really important, both to sort of like restoration organizations, but also to local communities, largely agricultural communities. But this doesn't necessarily mean that everybody agrees, right? People use and mobilize like archaeological inheritances in different ways in making their arguments. Some people might tell you that the Somerset Levels used to be one integrated floodplain 500, 600 years ago. And other people might identify themselves with the generations after generations of people who've been managing water levels on the levels for that 500 years. More than the archaeological heritage, though, the landscape of the Somerset Levels, like it sounds like something you read on the back of a conflict packet, but it's really important. it does hold really a lot of memories, experiences for people, many of whom have lived here for generations. You know, you talk to farmers especially, people remember jumping ditches as a child, you know, arriving home, freezing cold and wet through. And so the way people are engaging with these landscapes are complex, emotional, and embodied. What does that mean in practice? It means remembering that ditches aren't just drainage infrastructure, right? They're places, important places for people where they played, grew up, worked, and we shouldn't necessarily treat them as like obstacles to just treat them as obstacles to change. The idea behind this line of inquiry is basically to understand how the current drive to restore peatlands for climate mitigation is engaging with local communities and local contexts. I think that there can be a tendency for everybody to see peat restoration as something that gets imposed down from above without much reference necessarily to local character. But what we're seeing on the ground is that the different routes restoration can take is very much structured by local conditions. You know, the idea, at least, is that recognizing this and understanding how it works will help us to inform peat restoration moving forwards. So you can't have a conversation about peat restoration without having a conversation about science and the role that science is playing in society. We're really interested then in how different actors draw from and contest different scientific arguments and therefore participate in the production of scientific knowledge. In principle, science is open and democratic, but in practice, people often feel excluded from the production of information, which can have massive effects on their lives. One really interesting point about this is that farmers are increasingly concerned about the impact of raised water tables on the wildlife of the Somerset levels. And this is really interesting because you get into different perspectives on what nature is, what nature should be, what nature's for. You know, you talk to farmers and their perspective is that they've been farming alongside nature on the levels for generations, for generations. You know, they know the ground nesting birds, the other fauna that like improved drained grassland. Then on the other side, you know, obviously the levels were one floodplain, and you know, people will argue that they can be playing that role for the sake of national biodiversity as well as obviously for national net zero goals. There aren't any easy answers here, but it's a good start at least to be aware that science is a really broad church, and that discussions about peatland restoration necessarily invoke questions about the specific role that science can be playing and should be playing in society. Finally, we are interested in the emergence of new peat-based economies, right? Thinking specifically of carbon credits, but also biodiversity net gain. So the credits are often seen and represented as a key way to plug the funding gap between public finance and restoration goals, as well as to maintain the profitability of land during any shift away from agriculture. These demonstrate the importance of local context, right? Thinking specifically of local agricultural economies to how peat restoration actually takes place on the ground. There's a fair amount of skepticism around these new ways of making money from peat. Agriculture is a risky business at the best of times, and I think that a lot of farmers feel as though it's a very big risk to be taking on for such a long period of time. There are also some interesting, more principled objections to carbon credits, right? People who think that as offsets, basically what they're doing is just allowing businesses to continue to burn more and more fossil fuels. Still others feel such a strong connection to their land, they wouldn't take any amount of money to change their practices. For my part, I think that there's probably a little bit of danger in these discussions that we treat money and carbon as if they're just a common denominator that we can use to measure everything else. I think that, you know, the way life works in practice is probably a bit more complicated than that. So in terms of outputs, this is a 3-year project. We're about halfway through. We're looking to publish 4 peer-reviewed articles in human geography, political ecology journals, those kind of things. I'm writing one at the minute. It is as painful as it sounds. Each team member is going to lead on one paper. We're also going to put together a series of guidelines for scaling up peatland restoration in a manner that's kind of sensitive to diverse local and cultural contexts. We have a project website, peatscapes.com, for all your peatscaping needs. It's got a picture gallery, a list of outputs, and we will have a blog soon. And finally, we do hope to host an interdisciplinary symposium at the University of Bristol on sort of peatland restoration as a social as well as an ecological process. Thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thank you, Nye. Any questions? Sean?
Hello, Nye, thank you. That was really interesting. I suppose I had two questions. Obviously, first, if you could let us know when your kind of symposium in Bristol is going to be, when it's all scheduled, and obviously within your research project, that would be really, really great. And the other one, you mentioned just at the end there about sort of the restoration kind of techniques sort of side and all the rest of it. Who is that going to be? You who's responsible for writing that, or is that something that as a project team, everyone will be contributing to? Obviously, you've got quite diverse, from Honeygar ex-dairy farm to some of the sites in Estonia you were just looking at. There's quite variation there.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Honestly, do you mean the policy principles, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, excellent point. I think that was written possibly with the idea that we'd write bespoke ones for each, but I expect that both sides of the project would put into both sets of principles. But obviously, sort of the UK side of the project, which would be me and especially my boss James, would be probably writing. But I expect also that they would probably be something that would emerge out of more like direct consultation, thinking specifically about the symposium.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Will, you have the next question.
Thank you. It's really interesting because I think we often don't ask the question, what does land mean to society, in a relatively agnostic, neutral way. We tend to come to the debate with our own biases and preconceptions, and that's what motivates us. That's why we're doing this. But it's very useful to take a step back and say, at scale, what does land mean to society? So I think that's fascinating. The question was going to be, are you contributing to the land use framework consultation that is currently happening? Because that's the kind of level of abstraction that could develop structural solutions to decision making, not the actual decisions, but develop the structural tools to allow us to make spatial decisions.
I mean, just like a predictably brilliant question. No, but it's the first thing I'm going to do when I get off this meeting, is talk to James about it.
Great. Thank you, Will. Mark, then Georgia.
Yeah, hi. Now you mentioned that talking to some farmers, you received from the view that they felt that traditional management, sort of the sort of drainage regime was good for biodiversity, and that's really what should continue. I'm sure you would do this, but I think obviously in your project needs to be balanced around the evidence in terms of, is that true? And I looking at the water quality issues, water availability, and that, and all the Ramsar triplocydes they're unfavourable for water quality. I think I'd argue quite strongly that there is a counter argument to that, which is evidence based. And now I agree that their opinion, or the opinion you received, is completely valid as part of the discussion, because that's what the project's about. But just ensure that it's balanced and.
Oh no, absolutely. No, that's a completely fair question, and I think that. Sorry, I'll let you finish, but yeah.
I finished. That's all I want to say.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry. It's just I was too excited to answer. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great point, and it is absolutely really, really important. I think that one of the things that's interesting is the framing of biodiversity, and I think that I probably slipped up by framing it as biodiversity, which has like quite a concrete and specific meaning. Whereas I think that farmers wouldn't really, in my experience, really use that specific framing. And I think that like for biodiversity specifically, I think that absolutely, I think that that's a really key point. But I do think that land use changing species composition in both directions is basically where it emanates from for them. But I also absolutely recognize that. I mean, there are 100% serious costs associated with especially in terms of water quality. So yeah, no, it's a good point, and it's something that we need to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Georgia.
Hi, Nye. Really interesting, and obviously looking forward to seeing all the results and things, and it's really important. Similar, I guess, or Mark kind of got in there before, but I was sort of reflecting that I've heard many of the issues directly from what you've raised, but just trying to understand that the study will also take in the wider context and the kind of the intensification of agriculture practices. And I've spoken to people who have exactly said it's the raised water levels that's reducing biodiversity, and however you define that, but refuse to accept that heavier machinery is having an impact, or loss of habitat or loss of hedgerows, and it's not farming practices, which I'm not blaming, but are refusing to accept that that's in any way contributing. So just making sure that that gets taken into account, and also wondering, while I've got the floor, and I'll sort of make it a two-part question, there's lots of lessons to learn from places like Holland as well around this, and if that's being taken into account. I know you don't have any sites, it's the full sites, but lots of lessons, probably good and bad, to be learned from from Holland in particular, but I'm sure other places too.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are super questions, really super questions. So it's, I think I'll answer the second one first because it's probably slightly easier. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of really key sort of really quite environmentally relevant and especially socially relevant things coming out of sort of social scientists in the Netherlands, looking at restoration processes there. We've got links with one sort of social scientist embedded in kind of a living lab in the Netherlands, which is really good. We're sort of like, part of a reading group with them, which is fantastic. And also, I think that we are, as much as we are, we have specific sites, we are also, I suppose, interested in how peatland restoration science and ideas about how it could or should be undertaken socially, but especially also how it is, received socially. I think we're interested in how those ideas move between different contexts, and the extent to which they are transferable between different contexts, given the importance of, the local conditions that sort of, I've highlighted. Does that make sense? And then in terms of the first one, yes, this is in some ways like a classic problem for social science, is like finding that balance, but absolutely, yes, the study will absolutely take into account the wider context and the sort of especially the sort of the long-term histories, the long-term environmental histories of these sites. I'm trained as a historian, and so yes, absolutely, the sort of long-term environmental histories, the legacies of transformative environmental and indeed social change on a lot of our sites is super important to how we want to, I guess, find balance, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope that was okay.
Thank you. Mike Bird.
Yeah, just a quick one. I was just following up on what has just been said. And I mean, the whole question when you ask the farmers and stuff like that is, well, what is normal? It's the whole moors have changed over hundreds of years progressively. So what farmers think of normal is actually not normal at all. So and then how far do you take it back, and what was the wildlife like, and what is it? There's so many questions there to actually answer what is normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is why why I was so in love with the project when I first saw it. I mean, it's just I mean, it's a time of transformative change in landscapes that have been the subject of several transformative changes. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And sort of that precise question, what is normal? And also particularly how is normal produced? What, where do different normals come from? Is something that we're really, really interested in. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Morag.
I suppose tying on to that a little bit, you mentioned about doing, I think, did you call it photo voice? And I just wondered whether you're going to look at archive photos that people might have to try and evidence what that environment used to look like and how they feel that that's changed for them.
That's a really good idea. So basically, that wasn't the plan, but I think it's a really, really good idea. I think that so there's two complexities basically. There's a complexity of like reaching out to people who have already been interviewed, but that should be fine. Anyway, these are practical issues. Basically, it's a wonderful idea, and either we'll use public archives or we'll make it part of the interview process going forward, that we ask people if they've got pictures that they'd want to share of like histories and memories with these landscapes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for all those questions. No, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting.
Thank you very much for having me.
Moving on, so Jen is up next with agenda item 6, which is Somerset Moor Futures, Learnings and Outcomes for the initial year of the Lowland Agricultural Peat Water Discovery Pilot Project Delivery. Not sure I put all those letters in the right way around, or those words in the right way around, but please correct me if I haven't, Jen, and fire away.
No, that was absolutely correct. Let me just share my screen. I'm also going to bombard you with a few slides. Apologies. Let's see if this works.
Yes, yeah, we can see that.
Bear with me while I just try and make it a slideshow and not just a... What do you see? Do you see my deck, or do you see my notes?
No, we see the deck now. Or the slideshow.
Okay.
The slideshow. Sorry, I was
The
doing
correct
the
screen,
right way around because
when I'm on a dual screen, it's always throwing me. Sometimes it
yes.
yeah. Anyway, hi everyone. Thanks for the invite by you guys to kind of update you on this. I've sat through some of these meetings and yeah, been keen to kind of bring this update to you for a little while, but it's a perfect timing because we've just wrapped up. I wasn't expecting Will to be on the call today, so now it's like having the big bad boss watch you do your work. Will, by all means, come in at the end and correct anything that you think I might have misrepresented. So I'm going to talk to you about our project. Because of the long acronym LAPWDP, we quickly switched to our own title, that being Somerset Moor Futures, and it's a project delivered by FWAG Southwest, led by Will Barnard, who's in the room, and Avon Wildlife Trust, who were kind of the partnership up in North Somerset, and that was led by myself. It was a project conceived by my boss Shelley Easton and Will. Shelley had done lots of work on the Adapting the Levels programme down in Somerset for Somerset Wildlife Trust, so some really nice joined up stuff across the Mendips. Come on, you're going to work for me. There we go. So project aims, I'm going to keep it short and simple because I forgot to set my timer. That was a really good idea by Nye, and then I completely forgot about it because I got taken up by his thing. Sean, give me a holler if I'm looking like I'm going to go over, or Dan, either of you. So the project aims to develop and trial a farmer-led model for collaboration and consensus building. Essentially trying to get to a place where we had a usable and transferable method to help people manage a discussion about change and about change across a whole moor landscape. You know, not an easy thing to do when you consider the kind of diverse people that maybe work and love their moors, and all of the stuff that Nye's just been talking about. You know, they kind of the personal and cultural connections to these spaces too makes it quite a complicated task. But that was kind of our overarching aim, and we had some deliverables within that. So we wanted to set up 5 new moor associations. Now I'm saying the word moor association assuming that people in the room know what that means, but just in case they don't, it's kind of a cluster of farmers and landowners who have a shared connection to a moor, and that being a piece of land that is linked by kind of a hydrological block connection. Down here in Somerset and North Somerset, we term them moors, hence the name. I've learnt that in other parts of the world it's not, or the country, it doesn't quite work out in this quite the same way. But that is, yeah. So the Moor Association, a concept that I believe Will came up with some years ago and has been developing to great success down in Somerset. But we didn't have anything happening over in North Somerset, and there was also a need for new ones to be created down in Somerset. So that was our initial target, 5 new ones. We wanted to run information workshops for these Moor associations and anyone else that wanted to come along to set out some of the project context, to talk about relevant science, and to also talk to them about the opportunities that might be available to them. with a kind of wider umbrella concept of kind of land use change or land use planning within that. We wanted to assemble a landowner working group that would come up with that model of deciding how to decide. And then we wanted to test that model that they came up with by running 2 or as many as we could, but ideally at least 2 more associations through that process of whole moor land use planning. And then we needed to cost those plans at the end and give that big old inventory and costing list back to our project funders to help them understand what it actually would cost on the ground if they wanted to see change across these moors to achieve their objectives from a kind of carbon and peatland restoration perspective. So I've got a few outcome slides just to tell you where we got to. I'm not going to go through the nitty-gritty of all the things that happened between project conception and project outcome because, there were lots of little quirks and learnings along the way. I'll pick up on a few of those at the end. We did manage to get 5 more associations established, which we're very happy about. You can see here on that map, we had 2 down in Somerset, Teelham and Tadham and Queen Sedgemoor. Teelham and Tadham actually, interestingly, decided to opt for a virtual model of more associations rather than meeting in person. It just seemed to fit their needs better. Although I think there's now a interest in trying to get them in a room so that they can actually meet each other. And then up in North Somerset, we had 3, Gordano Valley, and then Tickenham and Nailsea, which were initially going to be formed as a single moor association. But due to landowner preference and scheduling and some farmers being more keen to get cracking than others, we decided to keep them separate, and that is still the case at the moment. Butley was an interesting one because it was initially in scope, but it was taken out of scope due to a bit of a divisive issue within the community, which was a large solar farm application, which you probably know way more about than I do. But yes, it was quickly realised that was not going to be a goer down there. So in total, that is 48 farmers and landowners who represent 40 different businesses, and that covers a footprint of 2,300 hectares, which is not insignificant. Some more outcomes for you. So we did run some very successful workshops across the context setting, the science and the opportunities piece. They may have adjusted in their delivery as, compared to the plan that we originally set out, but that was all about adapting to, what the feedback we were getting and various things. So you can see on the image of the opportunities workshop, the kind of things that we were talking to them about. I'll just run through a few. So I was often focusing on the climate change piece and making it relevant and setting context for them. We talked about how important peatlands were. We talked about the finance aspect, so agri-environment scheme options and all the green finance bits and pieces. We made sure we talked about landscape recovery and kind of related it back to the active projects that were in the nearby areas so they could understand what's happening on the ground. We talked a lot about paludiculture, and we had somebody from Ponder come and do presentations for us. And then we left lots of space for questions and milling about with cups of tea and coffee and, actually just people getting to know each other because, that was also part of the piece was breaking down any, barriers and making sure that everyone was talking to each other. We also successfully set up the landowner working group, and they came up with this model. You can see it represented in this little flowchart here. It's definitely not rocket science. Essentially, it also relies on some foundational things being in place before this kind of model works. The first of all being to have a mature and kind of well-established moor association to trial this with, or to run this process with. Given that we were testing it on very, very new moor associations, we had to kind of skip past some of our own golden rules. So the process itself would be, creating a subcommittee within a moor association. That subcommittee would come up with an initial proposal of possible options for each moor association member that would be kind of relevant to their moor. Then they would gather feedback from an in-person meeting. With that feedback, they'd draft some kind of first proposal, and then they'd bring that back to people and get feedback on it, and they'd have discussions, they'd listen to everybody's concerns. Then they'd amend the proposal based on all that, and they'd go through that process again and again and again until we got to some kind of consensus about how whole moor land use could move forward. And it's not that everybody would have to do the same thing. It's just that everyone's choices has to work with everyone else's choices, because that's the complication when you're working at this kind of scale. So with that model in our back pocket, we then unleashed it on a couple of willing guinea pig moor associations. We did this in a very hypothetical context, and they understood that absolutely. So they were not being asked to make decisions that would actually be carried out on the ground. But we wanted it to be a simulation as realistic as possible. So we were asking them to really consider their business and their appetite for change. And, it really does set up their thought process for thinking about moving from where they are now to something, a future model. So we held it over 2 groups. We did a Gordano session, and then we did a Tickenham Nelsey combined session. Partly to do with the fact that Tickenham Nelsey actually is just one block of land, and so it works much better that way, but also for time constraints. We were trying to deliver this all in a very short window, so we did have some time constraints. We made sure that we got them in the room and we gave them as much as we possibly could to help them make the decisions that we needed them to make. So the background information that we gave them covered things like the hydrology. We gave them up-to-date peat maps. We had good quality LiDAR. We talked about emissions from each parcel. We talked about information to do with the freeboard. And then we also, we brought in all of the kind of relevant designations and other considerations for their particular area. And then we made sure that there were experts in the room. So somebody who could talk about the water, somebody who could talk about the agri-environment schemes in detail. And we had an ex-land agent who had really good expertise in business planning and kind of the legal stuff regarding tenancy options and the landowner-tenant relationship piece. And then we let them loose and to go and play. And we wanted to make it, we kind of did a bit of gamification. There's a picture of Risk up there because that was kind of in our mind's eye when we were creating this concept. So you can see in that middle image, tables with a piece of a map on it, and you can see that map's got some LiDAR layer on it. So we blew up their moor, figuratively speaking, and we gave them tokens that they could place on their fields. Each token had a value. They could do supplementary actions where they were relevant. And, if they had a question about, could I do this here? We brought over the right expert in the room to kind of advise and guide. And it worked really well. There was obviously hesitancy at the beginning because it was a new thing for everybody. And there was also hesitancy about, I don't want to tell my secrets. I don't want to spill my business methods and how much I want to make off my land. But that was part of the piece that we were doing, was breaking down that worry and making sure that everyone felt in a safe and supported space. And one of the benefits of doing this kind of big, round a table board game kind of style was that everyone could kind of talk. They could talk to their neighbours, literally look at their bordering field parcels and say, oh, I see that you've got appetite to do that. Well, if we're in this block of land here that makes sense, we could join up our aspirations, and maybe we could achieve this together. Let's bring over the water guide to see if that's possible. So it was it worked in the way that we had hoped it was going to work. So here's a map that I ask you not to scrutinize too much because it's it's pertinent to one particular moor, but this is the kind of thing that we produced at the end to show DEFRA. And it contains a range of ambitions. I'm not saying that everybody was going to push their land use change to the nth degree, and it certainly wasn't necessarily as ambitious as some players in the room might want it to be in terms of kind of wholesale peat restoration. But it was kind of a first stepping stone to see, if we could get people to think about making changes to their current farming practice, to benefit the landscape that they're working in. And this was costed up and fed back to the funders, and feedback from the people that took part in this exercise was very positive. 100% said that they would recommend it to other more associations, which was really positive. You know, we didn't get 100% for all of our questions that we asked them in feedback, but it was broadly very positive, and they gave us some really good learnings that we could kind of tailor for our next iterations of this process. I was just want to run through some of the barriers that came up as a result of this year. I have to say the presentation that Nigel just gave was incredibly pertinent to me in terms of the conversations that were being had, you know, either around the kitchen tables in farmers' houses, or that I was hearing in the room. You know, the connection to the land, the historical context, what their parents, what their grandparents used to do on the land. That it's all connected in the conversations that we're having. Anyway, I'll start at the top. So, as with anything, anytime, anywhere, getting attendance is always tricky, but it's particularly tricky when you have some of the wettest seasonal weather that you've ever had, and or stakeholder fatigue, because some of the conversations we were trying to have with some of our farming groups, they'd already had, you know, in previous iterations of previous projects. And then, of course, certain seasonalities mean that farmers are going to be somewhere. We had to deliver this project. You know, it wasn't necessarily perfect timing to kind of start doing all the intensive stuff towards the end of summer at harvest time. So, you know, we did try and tailor it to capture as many people as we could, but we never got full turnout for anything. Key landowners who are disengaged, or those who are slow to come on board, obviously going to be a massive barrier. And again, you're never going to get everybody turning up and being in from the start. We had some real wins towards the end of the project. Some people who had been quite hesitant and reluctant started to show up. And I had some fairly, you know, last minute meetings to bring them up to scratch, and so that they could get involved in the process. And then we had a couple of the significant, like strategically significant people not want to engage at all, and explain the reasons why not, which are perfectly understandable, but also massively disappointing. And those are things that we're always going to have to consider. What if somebody who's strategically where their land is in a really key place decides not to be involved? How do you work around that? Do you try and engineer it out, or do you just walk away and say, okay, that's not for now, let's try somewhere else? So, you know, decisions that you'll have to make along the way. I mentioned about the solar farm application, so that's a very divisive point, and that those kind of things will crop up. We all know about this, but the complexity of the agri-environment schemes is very unhelpful, and going through this transition process at the moment is both an opportunity but also a real headache, trying to get people up to scratch and keep them with relevant knowledge so they can make decisions. And the same thing for the nature markets, given that it's such a new space, and we're trying to get people to think about making decisions based on the knowledge that's out there. I mean, I'm still confused, and I've been trying to get my head around it for the last, 12 months, going to every possible webinar I could possibly, get my hands on, and I'm still, scratching my head about the routes through and the options available and what works where. So the need for trusted advisors is really key. We had some areas where there's incredibly complicated landlord-tenant relationships, sometimes 3 layers, and that means when you talk about money, it gets quite choppy and it gets quite complicated, and who gets how much, obviously that has to be done on a kind of individual relationship basis. But when you're trying to get a whole block of land to make decisions together, those are obviously going to be key sticking points. So that's a piece that still needs to be smoothed out. Trust, hugely important to get any kind of collaboration, and that's not just between the individuals in the room, that's between the people running the projects and those individuals, and then the level of trust between farmers and landowners and the government, potentially I'd say is at an all-time low, although I'm sure every generation has been able to say those things. But the inheritance tax stuff really came at the wrong time for us, so we had to navigate all of this with that wider context going on. This is a really important one, the need for dynamic water level management planning. So having static water level management plans is a real barrier. 2 pen levels changed at this kind of prescriptive time, and infrastructure maintained in a currently ever decreasing kind of state, has been flagged as a huge barrier for us. We need, if we're asking farmers to allow changes to their land which are going to really impact their farming practice, then they've said the least we need is a efficient system that responds when we need it to respond and can be more reactive. So we have fed this all back to our funders, that the water systems have got to be maintained at their best and in a reliable way if we're going to ask for these changes to be made. And that's quite a big ask. We appreciate that budgets are ever decreasing at the moment, and that doesn't really help with that barrier. Last two, so the time required to build more associations if there's no local facilitator kind of embedded in the community is also a thing. I dropped into North Somerset with no kind of local connections aside from the ones that we had with Natural England partners, and as Avon Wildlife Trust has land in the space, we did have existing relationships that I could pick up, but I was coming in from cold, and it's taken me the best part of 10 months, to get 3 up and going, which is probably not bad going really, but it does take time. You can't rush the relationship building piece. And then polyculture and the immaturity of that industry as it stands, also not helpful when you're trying to tell people that this is an actual realistic option. If they haven't got anywhere to look at that's not just a trial piece, and they can't feel secure in, if they made that choice to put that in, that they'd know what they would need to do and what they would get out of it. So some key barriers. And then finally, some lessons learnt. So I've talked about it many times, but trust and relationship building is like the key when you want to get farmers in the room and you're asking them to work with you. This is outside of their farming time. They are time poor people as it from the base anyway. So having those dedicated farm facilitators are absolutely essential, and having the time that you need to build those relationships organically, also really important. We learned that the facilitation during the land planning process is absolutely essential. I think there's a hope from central government that they might be able to do it themselves at some point, and maybe they will when this model, if we test it and it continues to work and grow and develop, is embedded. But at the moment, they're a long way off from being able to do it on their own. So those facilitator roles are still very, very much needed. And when we do that, it's very resource intensive. So in one of our sessions, we had 4 experts to 10 farmers, and that was the least that we could have managed with. The process also needs to be more than a single year, and I think everyone realizes that doing a project like this in such a short time is absolutely ridiculous, really. We fed back that actually a 2 to 5 year window was actually more appropriate for this kind of massive change that you're asking people to undergo. As even when you're only testing it with the hypotheticals, it's a very emotionally charged thing. This is the kind of stuff that I was talking about. It impacts livelihoods and it impacts homes. So asking them to rush through that and make quick decisions is not going to work, and people are just going to back out of the process. And then finally, the uncertainty around the expectations from a policy perspective, and also the funding streams. We're reaching a kind of critical point here, and we need those answers to start becoming more cemented so that people have a foundation to base all the decisions off. And I know we're moving in that direction, but I don't think anybody feels at the moment that the ground is completely safe and stable under their feet. So those are some key lessons learned. And then finally, some next steps. We'll probably jump in if I say too much, but we are hoping that we get an extension on this project. We're awaiting the funding decision, but we're hoping for at least another year to keep working on this stuff, because it's been so important and we've built up good momentum, and we feel that if we stop now, the trust levels will drop with our stakeholders. So we want to keep going. If we get that money, we're looking at doing some more one-to-one business support stuff for the people that have already gone partway on that journey towards land use change decisions. We feel that they need kind of a bit more focused time. we want to explore this really cool digital interactive mapping resource that that we brought into the project fairly late. You can see a little screenshot of it on that image there. It's kind of all the information we gave them when they were in the room doing the workshops, the land use change workshops, but we want them to be able to take it away, so they haven't just got this 2-hour window to kind of absorb all that. It's, you know, they can look at it when they're having a cup of tea at home. Obviously there's some kind of tech, you know, basic tech abilities that's reliant on, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. We want to grow more associations and mature the existing ones to get them ready to kind of partake in this process for real. There's a whole community engagement piece that we need to do now. We focused on our landowners and farmers, but now we need to make sure that the community that exists around their moors is also aware of what's happening, because they could be a real game changer. That, you know, they could dislike the idea and really put the kibosh on it. And then really what we're hoping for is that we can prepare for a landscape recovery round 3 application if and when they ever decide to release it. That would be our main hope for kind of delivering this ambition that we have for these areas. Sorry if I overran, but that is me. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Jen. Wow, you came in bang on time. Wonderfully done without a timer. Any questions for Jen or Will? Simon, come on in.
Well done, Jen. That's and Will, very much an amazing piece of work. I would just add one question about the appetite for landowners to actually sort of like manage their own water levels. You know, did that come across?
We'll jump in if you want to, but I think there's definitely some awareness of a shift in responsibility from, you know, the statutory bodies who have always done it, and then their ability to continue to do it and to affect it. There was a lot of people that said, yeah, just give me the key to the weir and I'll make sure it happens. But I think it was said slightly tongue in cheek. But I think if there was a financial incentive for that to be possible, and they were given access and, you know, the skills and whatever's needed to do it, I think that people would really rather that they had their own ability to change water levels and, you know, do the dynamic stuff themselves. They might not think that when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they need to go and lower or raise something because there's a, you know, a extreme storm about to happen. I don't know. Will, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, if I could chip in. So we're in a bit of a fortunate position in that we were lucky enough to work with Somerset Wildlife Trust on their LR project. We're working with the RSPB on their LR project, and then we're doing this bottom-up approach in North Somerset. And the of those 3, the most mature thinking seems to have come from Damon in terms of the single legal entity and his LR. He's looking at embedding funding for the LR project to employ someone to do that, but embed them within the IDBs. So they have that very focused IDB kind of oversight, but the IDBs aren't carrying the cost for delivering a private scheme, and it bridges the gap. It feels to me like that's quite a good fit, you know, for the landscape as it stands. Maybe not long term, but that's probably a solution that would probably work.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Doing it that way around, and there's also a huge amount of technology that's out there that you know, can operate things remotely. You know, as long as you've got the sufficient power source to actually do it. I know there is a reluctance from the IDB to actually explore some of those technologies. So maybe that's another barrier that we need to break down actually in the future. But yeah. But brilliant work, well done.
You can definitely see something like the online system that Jen discussed there being the platform that functions as a dynamic water level management system, and then drives, you know, sucking in telemetry from the system and then driving tilting weir decisions automatically, because it doesn't cost a lot to automate. So there's definitely a future within the next 10 years where it is a lot more hands-free and dynamic.
Yeah, brilliant.
Great. Mark, you have a question?
Hi, Jen. Just following on from that discussion about dynamic water level management, I was just wondering whether that, I mean, I can understand why they would want that. It makes total sense, obviously. But was there an acceptance amongst the farmers that you spoke to that you do need more winter water storage within the system in order to realise this? Because obviously that is all the evidence is pointing to that.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we had quite a few stakeholders in the room that already operated raised water level areas on a lot of land. So they spoke with experience about having these kind of systems already there and already not really necessarily causing them a problem. I think there was a general awareness that raised water levels in winter is the direction of travel. We were really focusing on our summer water because it's the summer water. It's both the availability, but it's also, you know, it's the drying out of the top layer of peat that causes most concern. So, and that's when most of our farmers are active on the land. That's when they need their cattle down there, and that's when they need to be able to get machinery, if necessary, down to the fields too. So, winter and the status quo was kind of taken as read. Summer was where people started to get a bit twitchy about the idea of wetter, because for those, especially those in the raised water level, they were saying, well, it's already wet enough, thank you very much, I could really not do with much more water down there. And it's kind of edging those people from that perspective, and even their neighbours who are on the drier parts, seeing what they're saying to those conversations and thinking, well, if they're already saying they're struggling with that, you know, what is it like if we're adding another 10 or 20 centimetres of water table to that space? So yeah, it's a complicated piece.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of linking that to sort of the project that Simon's been running, you know, around water resource, you know, availability for re-wetting. Correct if I'm wrong here, Simon, but I thought the conclusion to that was, well, you probably would need to store quite a bit more water in winter in order to get you through the summer.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So I think they looked at a number of different ways of actually doing that, and yeah, there is a considerable amount of water that is required to offset that evapotranspiration actually through the summer months, if you are going to do it on a whole more scale. So you know, and it might be that you know, you can transition and sort of like move forward with on a field by field basis, but you're going to get to a point where there's just not going to be enough water. So so I think that's something that's going to have to be taken into consideration when, you know, when you're looking at whole more planning and everything as well.
And we did actually feed that back to the stakeholders. You know, we had the kind of some of the headline results from your study, Simon, that, you know, they were aware that it wasn't a case of just, you know, raising ditch levels. It's having the water to do that with in the first place, and we get that in winter. So yeah, absolutely.
We just about managed to close that loop within the project, but it was quite tight. Some quite good thinking is coming from Rob Lowe in terms of summer water resource availability, and it looks like a mixed model of in-field storage carrying winter through, spring as far as we can, and then some offline storage is probably where it's going to land. But that's not in discussion with landowners. That's a pure hydrologist's take on, if you were an engineering take, if you were given this landscape, how would you solve this at best value? So yeah, Rob Lowe's done some good thinking on that.
Great, thank you, Will. Bernie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just particularly in North Somerset in relation to Gordana Valley being one of the new moors, it's just amazing to have that platform really, and have that group of people working together and getting all this information and being able to help them adapt to the future aspirations for that area, because it is large areas of it are in conservation management or ownership. So hopefully through this forum we will just be able to kind of have that approach where we can help them adapt to what is going to happen when we take all the information Simon has gathered through the council reports and all of the eco-hydrology stuff and all of the peatland discovery work that's happening with Johnny Rook at the minute, feed it all in together, and then we have these moors existing now, and we can use them as a really good vehicle to kind of make sure the farmers get to feed in and are part of the journey when it happens.
Great, thank you, Bernie. Yeah, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Will. That really is amazing work. I'm constantly amazed by the work of Moorland associations and being around farmers kind of most of my life, and seeing how competitive they can be and how different viewpoints how many different viewpoints you can have for very few people in the room. It's great to see. Lastly, any other business for anyone? Sean.
Hello, just a couple from me quickly. I've put some links in the chat for a couple of events and things that are coming up. So take a look, sign up if you're interested in any of those. And yeah, Simon, I know I've talked about it in the past if you're still on, but yeah, obviously it'd be great to have you present to us at some point in the future when you know what the next steps might be, but also the outcomes in the first instance. So thank you very much. Brilliant.
Absolutely no problem.
Cheers.
Yes, I think me and Simon spoke about this recently. Actually, I think he's intending to come to us when the future meetings would be really interesting. Lastly, thank you all for your participation today. Our next meeting is in June 2025, date to be announced. I think I'm going to take this rare opportunity to top up my vitamin D because I'm basically translucent at the moment before my next meeting. Hope to see you in June. Thank you very much. Bye. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Cheers.